At the moment I am writing this, it took place 2 weeks ago. I have always disliked almost all of my neighbors. I am fresh out of college and living on my own, but that comes with a cost. I live in a really awful area, the only place where I can afford a house, so I am not exactly surrounded by ideal neighbors. The people on one side always blast their music, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest individuals I have ever met. There are 2 people living next door, one woman in her 60s who is not friendly at all, and honestly does not seem fully there, and a slightly younger woman who appears to have severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what their relationship is. I would often sit on my front porch and look over to see the older woman holding the younger woman back during one of her intense episodes. She would cross her arms tightly and rock back and forth quickly while screaming and making strange noises. Sometimes she would even stare at me and point while mumbling something to the older woman. It is actually very unsettling. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early because of work in the morning. However, the neighbors next door were louder than usual. I could hear the unstable woman screaming and having a breakdown as the older woman yelled in distress. This continued for nearly an hour, and I could not take it anymore. I walked over to the house next door and pounded on the door. The older woman opened it and said, "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could for them to keep the noise down. She raised her eyebrows and lowered her head slightly, clearly irritated by my request. Right then the younger woman came into the living room, shouting, "How dare you," over and over. The older woman held her back as she tried to move toward me and then slammed the door in my face. I had no clue what had just happened, but I felt like I had not achieved what I went there for. I returned to my bed in defeat. Still, I noticed they had finally become quiet next door. I finally managed to fall asleep. Then I woke up feeling like the night had passed way too quickly. I checked my clock and saw that it was only 3 in the morning. My head dropped back onto the pillow in relief, but soon I thought I heard something coming from downstairs. I got out of bed and walked to my door just to make sure I was not imagining it. When I did not hear anything else, I went back to bed. I woke up again in complete darkness. Only 20 minutes had gone by since I had fallen asleep. I did not know what had woken me up, and then I heard it again. I panicked and scrambled to find my phone on my bedside table to use as a light, but once I grabbed it, I did not dare turn it on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to see if someone was hiding there. I checked every corner, and even though the room was almost completely dark, I could tell nobody was standing in any of them. This time I heard exactly where the sound came from. I turned toward the side of my bed and saw a dark round shadow-like shape right at the edge of the wooden frame. When the light from my phone illuminated that black shape, and it turned out to be the face of the unstable woman from next door, she screamed like a complete maniac. She shrieked like she was burning in the light. I screamed too. I yelled as I stumbled toward the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see her coming after me. I slammed the bedroom door shut behind me and ran downstairs, where I locked the door that led to the upper floor. I called the police as the woman pounded on the door while screaming nonsense. When the officers arrived, I told them she lived next door and that she was completely mentally unwell. The older woman from next door came outside after hearing all the noise and talked with the officers, begging them to let the younger woman stay, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One officer asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he said this, the older woman gave me the most vicious and hateful look possible. I decided not to press charges, but her glare did not change. The officers took the disturbed woman away, while the older woman kept staring at me as she returned to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get into her car and drive off. Both of them still live next to me. I am seriously thinking about moving, because the older woman next door makes it very clear that she hates me. And I have realized that the mentally unstable woman is not just frightening, but dangerous as well. I am in a troubling situation right now, and honestly, I have no idea how to handle it. Let me go back to the start. 5 years earlier, my neighbor who lives beside me, Charlie, or Charles as everyone knows him, told us that his 14-year-old son had vanished. He contacted the police. It appeared in the news. It spread everywhere. My wife and I felt terrible, and we constantly offered to support them in any way we could. As time went on with no information about their boy, we assumed they eventually accepted what must have happened and understood that the worst was likely true. My wife and I never had the courage to ask if the body had ever been found. Now and then Charles and his wife invited us over for a barbecue during the warm seasons. We noticed neither of them ever seemed like the same people after their son went missing. Charles's wife, Kathy, became far more quiet and withdrawn, and Charles appeared more uneasy and nervous, both understandable considering what they had been through. Move ahead a couple of years to just last week. Charles walked up to me while I was taking out the trash and asked if he could borrow a shovel. Without a second thought, I hurried to bring him my best shovel, not questioning his reason for needing it. He thanked me and said he had some work to do in his backyard, and that he would return it by the next day. He then walked into his yard. I went inside, and when I stood by one of my upstairs windows that gives a view of Charlie's yard, I saw him digging a large hole in the ground. He seemed to be having difficulty, considering he is 56. I thought I would grab my spare shovel and offer some help. When I stepped into his yard and called out his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and rushed toward me saying, "No, it is fine, Tim. I can handle it. Please just go." I said, "What is the matter with you? This is not a big deal," mainly stunned by his odd behavior. He told me that he would not let me use that shovel in his yard, and then gestured toward the gate as if I were some animal. I was so shocked by how he behaved that I left without saying another word. I went upstairs again to watch him from the window. He continued digging for at least another 30 minutes. When he finally seemed to finish, he began glancing around, looking up toward nearby houses as if checking whether anyone was watching, and right before I could move away, he noticed me at the window. All I managed to do was step aside. He is doing something suspicious, and I felt the need to discover what it was. I kept checking his backyard every now and then, but he was no longer digging. I assumed he realized I had been watching and would wait until it was dark, and I was completely right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the soil outside. It was far too dark to see anything from my window, so I slipped outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging clearly now. When he went back inside his house, I used that moment to sneak into his yard and see what was inside the hole he had been working on. The moonlight alone showed a small part of a black garbage bag sticking out from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I stared at his back door and then at the hole. I repeated this 3 more times, trying to decide whether or not to find out what was inside the bag. In the end, I chose to hurry back to my own yard, and it was a good thing I did, because he came outside again only seconds later. But he was not digging anymore. Instead, he walked around to the other side of his house and never returned. I went back inside my house and slowly got into bed, trying not to wake up my wife. The next morning, the first thing I did was look through my window and saw that the hole in the ground was completely filled in within Charles's backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was now parked on the street instead of in his driveway. I do not know what happened during the rest of that night, but it troubles me to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. As far as I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever had been buried there before and take it somewhere else to get rid of it. This is all guessing, and you can call me crazy if you want. I have not said a word to anyone, not even my wife, and honestly, I do not know what to do. Charles never returned my shovel, and I will not ask him about it. He has also been avoiding me ever since, and something unsettling happened yesterday. I happened to glance out my window across to Charlie S. house and saw him standing at one of his windows staring into mine. When he noticed me, he closed his blinds, and this happened in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do now, and I am honestly frightened. I have lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family, and the one I live in now by myself. We stayed in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, then spent the next 7 years in the second house before I moved to my current home. What happened took place in that first house when I was 15, during the last few months before my family moved out. I do not recall my family ever being close with the neighbors. There were 2 boys living next door with their father and my brother, and I had only spoken to them maybe once or twice in our entire lives. As strange as that sounds, though, we did know their names, Eric and Todd. One day, my brother, who is 5 years younger than I am, and I were outside playing basketball in the driveway. That was when one of the boys next door, Todd, came outside and walked over to us, starting a conversation. I do not remember our exact words, but I clearly remember the first thing he asked us was if it was true we were moving. Since I was the older brother, I did most of the talking. Todd was likely around my age, though I never asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to go with him and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. I agreed because it was the weekend, and I had no plans anyway. My younger brother asked if he could come at the last second, not assuming he was automatically invited. Todd said yes, and then walked back home. Late the next day, around an hour before sunset, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We rushed to answer it because our parents did not know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric dressed in camo clothing and carrying a duffel bag full of BB guns felt really odd. The level of seriousness these 2 had about it was strange to me and my brother, and we kept exchanging looks, trying not to laugh a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods after speaking very few words. I could already tell these 2 were not very talkative, which might be why we had never gotten to know them before now. Todd dropped the duffel bag on the ground and unzipped it, while Eric snapped a branch off a tree and tossed it into the river. My brother and I looked at each other again, this time not finding anything funny. Todd took out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that was when Todd revealed the truth and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and started firing at trees across the river. Once I realized he was not joking about the guns being real, I felt both angry and confused. I took the gun from my brother and placed both weapons back into the bag. I told them we were not comfortable with this and needed to leave. Eric stopped shooting, and both of them looked at us with expressions that seemed partly angry. One of the boys shouted a curse word at us as we walked away. I had always suspected that those 2 were bad kids, but this proved it. I told my brother not to speak to them again for the rest of the time we lived there. At dinner that night, we told our parents that they were really strange kids, but we did not mention anything about the guns. I woke up later that night to a blast of cold air blowing on my face. My window was wide open. I felt something hard press against the back of my head as I looked toward the window, and someone behind me whispered, "CH." Somehow, I did not scream or jump. I stayed still. I was able to grasp what was happening much faster than I would have expected. I heard Todd's voice whispering right behind my head. He told me that if I ever told anyone, especially his dad, about the guns or what happened, he would come back and kill me and my whole family. I answered in a quiet, trembling voice, "Okay." He shoved my head with his gun, before climbing out through my window. Every night after that for months, I would spot either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, staring into either my room or my brother's room. Their behavior kept getting stranger as the date of our move got closer. About a week before we left, a rock hit my window one night at around 1 in the morning. I opened the window and saw Todd pointing a pistol up at me, and feeling like I was about to be shot, I threw myself onto the floor, only to hear both of them burst into laughter. I heard one of them call me a fucking retard. There were 2 other times that week when they harassed either me or my brother, and in the end, I could not think of a better time for us to finally move and leave that place. After all these years, neither my brother nor I ever told anyone about those boys or their threats. All I know is that they were real trouble, and it was a very good thing we got away from them when we did.